So my name is Simon Sadier. I am the pillar lead for urban mobility and sustainable accessibility at SSATP, the Africa Transport Policy Program. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the report Embracing Informal Transport, a new paradigm for urban mobility. So as you know, under the current development plan of SSATP, we have a strong focus on paratransit under our sustainable urban mobility and accessibility pillar. And some of you might be familiar with some of the knowledge products that we've published previously, the report on myths and realities on paratransit, some of the case studies that have been published in recent years as well on Dakar, Cape Town, Kigali, etc. And I would also like to mention that in addition to these sort of more traditional knowledge products, SSATP regularly organizes workshops and technical assistance on those themes. So today we're going to spend an hour and a half to look at pathways for improvement, for professionalization, and for the integration of paratransit based on the results of the study, which was led by my colleague Fatima Arroyo, and is feeding from case studies in 14 different countries and cities. So in the next hour and a half, we will start with an introduction by Mustafa Ben Mamar. Mustafa is the program manager for SSATP. And then we will hear a presentation of the report's main findings by my colleague Fatima Arroyo, who's a senior urban transport specialist and was the lead author of this report together with Philip van Reineveld and Brendan Finn. After that, we will receive insights from our panelists from 4 different cities that have conducted reforms or engaged at different levels with their paratransit industry. So for Freetown in Sierra Leone, we have Mr. Hindolo Shaka, who has been a director at the Ministry of Transport and Aviation for the past 14 years. And he also served as the project coordinator for the Integrated and Resilient Urban Mobility Project, the IRUMP, which was meant to improve and to professionalize and modernize public transport in Freetown. For Dakar, Senegal, we have Mr. Amadi Barrow Faye, who is an economist specialized in sustainable urban mobility. He is currently the engineer in charge of monitoring public transport operations at CETUD, which is the Greater Dakar Urban Transport Authority. From Antananarivo in Madagascar, we have Ms. Rojo Andriana Mpoina, who is a city planning engineer from the Higher Institute of Technology of Antananarivo, and currently working as deputy project manager with the NGO Kodatu, which supports urban mobility improvements in the global south. And finally, from Maputo, Mozambique, we have Mr. Afonso Jose Ronda, who is transport engineer specialized in railway, traffic, and pavement engineering, and currently involved in the World Bank-funded Maputo Metropolitan Area Mobility Project. As mentioned by my colleague Kaori, for those who just joined, there's live interpretation. Just click on the little globe at the bottom. I'll just say it in French in case some of you haven't found the button. Si vous avez besoin de l'interprétation simultanée, vous pouvez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur le symbole du globe et choisir le canal français. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mustafa Ben Mamar, SSATP project manager, for introductory remarks. Mustafa, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to resume this series of webinars with the SSATP. It's been a while now since we had one on this important topic, which is the paratransit. So allow me just to give you a little bit of an introduction and background. As you all know, African cities are growing at an unprecedented pace, and by 2050, nearly 900 million people will be added to the urban areas across the continent. We have a formal mass transit, but by itself alone, we don't think it will keep up with the scale and speed of demand. That is why we made informal or paratransit transport at SSATP a central piece of our work. Paratransit is the backbone of urban mobility in most African cities. It carries most of the daily trips, reaches underserved areas, and provides jobs, livelihoods for millions of people. And yet, despite its importance, it remains largely absent from formal policy and planning. Our latest report calls for a paradigm shift, moving away from efforts to replace paratransit and instead focusing on enhancing its integration into a public transport system. This is one of the most cost-effective and impactful strategies available at the moment to many of our city governments. And it will continue to play a major role with or without public support. And our development plan number 4, as I said earlier, improving paratransit remains a key theme under the urban mobility pillar. We have identified a set of entry points to inject some efficiency to the sector. And as Simon in his introduction earlier, we did publish a few policy papers accordingly. The first one, and that is DP4, was a paper on how to improve the urban transport governance. And we also published several papers to document the fleet renewal experiences. And I think this webinar will touch on this today. And we have also organized in the past many workshops and embedded all these findings in our training capacity building course. The report we present today offers evidence-based guidance conducted in Accra, Antananarivo, Bamako, Cape Town, Dakar, Freetown, Gaborone, Kampala, Kigali, Lusaka, Maputo, Maseru, Nairobi, and Nouakchott. And you will exchange perspectives on how to integrate and strengthen the informal public transport as part of a broader mobility strategy. I look really forward to the discussions, and I wish you a good deliberation. I will come back at the end to gather a few takeaways and then some concluding remarks. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. And after this introduction, we're going to jump right into the contents of the report. I will ask Fatima Arroyo to share her presentation with us. Fatima, over to you.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thanks to everyone that has connected today to this workshop. It is an important moment for us at SSATP. We are presenting today this this publication, Embracing Informal Transport, that actually brings together 3-4 years of research and different papers that we have been doing on the topic on informal transport. And I think Mustafa had put that context very well on, just imagine for 1 second that one of the African cities where you live, one of the African cities that you know or have visited, stop informal transport, minibuses, shared taxis, motorcycles for 1 single day. The city will stop functioning. In most of African cities, more than 90% of public transport trips are transported using these so-called informal transport modes. And when we look at the way these cities will continue growing, continue developing, and the scale of the needs for mobility, we know that informal transport will remain being dominant and very relevant for the decades to come. And it was in this context that in SSATP we started realizing that we needed to advocate for a change of paradigm in urban mobility. And a change of paradigm in which we look at informal transport to be really at the core of the efforts and solutions to provide a better future for people in African cities. And we guide our thinking following 3 main questions. The first one, it was the question on, do we really truly understand informal public transport well enough in Sub-Saharan African cities? The second question was, what are some of the practical experience in Sub-Saharan Africa or beyond to show how informal public transport can be supported, can be enhanced, and what we can learn from them? And the last question, it was, okay, so from all these experiences, all that knowledge, so how we can realistically, in a very practical point of view, think about a way forward for our African cities. And these 3 questions shaped the report that we are presenting today. I'm going to just be presenting some of the key findings and dimensions on these 3 questions in my presentations, but you will be able to find much more details in the paper. So the first question about understanding informal transport. We realized, looking at the existing literature, the existing documentation, that actually there were limited information on how really worked and what was the actual role of informal transport, the business model, how the sector financed their assets in most of the cities. There were some exceptions. South Africa was an exception where there were quite few documentation over the years. Nairobi was another city where there has been quite a lot of documentation. But beyond that, there was actually quite limited documentations over the years. So we decided to go deep into and collect information in 14 cities to try to understand better in informal transport. What we saw it is that, as we had imagined at the beginning, informal transport played this dominant role. Particularly minibuses tend to be the primary mode of public transport in most of the cities that we analyzed, although shared taxis are very relevant in most of the cities, especially serving periphery areas, but not only that. And motorcycle taxis has been growing exponentially over the last decades. Formal modes are present in most of the cities, but tend to transport a number of passengers that is relatively negligible, except few exceptions. And there has been some cities that have been doing, extremely good efforts also to improve some of the formal and mass transit, like commuter railway or BRT, such as Cape Town, Dakar, or Nairobi. Within this context, a couple of interesting findings were the first one, that we realized that in all these cities, it was not very clear to call something formal on or informal. We saw that this binary distinction between the formal and informal, it was not that clear. And when we try to dig a little bit deeper on it, what we saw it is that this informality had three main dimensions that we, classified in informality of service, informality of authority, and informality of organization. For example, in many cases, we saw that minibus operators operated under, under the authority, under the authorization of a license, and that they have duly got for an operations over the year, but they have a high level of informality in the way they provide the service and they were organized. So we were able to analyze for each of these 14 cities how the different informal modes of transport fit within this informality. The second question about the practical experience of informal transport. What we also realized it is that there has been documentation many kinds through the World Bank, through other development partners, through the academia in the region or elsewhere about formal modes of transport such as BRTs. But there was actually quite limited documentation about the actual very interesting experiences in Africa on how, the informal transport had been enhanced or improved. No? And here we look at this from these 14 cities that I mentioned before, or 14 countries, we look at eight of these where we saw there were interesting examples we could learn from. And we analyzed those examples from these, what we call these reform levels. These 5 areas of action that we saw were, it needed to be thought together in order, to think about how to go about working with the sectors. And these reform levels are regulation, organization of the sector, vehicle financing, operation and maintenance, and supporting infrastructure and systems. I'm gonna go through some of these programs just very briefly. You will see much more details on the report. In the Senegal case, this is probably one of the better known cases in the region. We have in SSATP documented, I think probably like 15 years ago, the beginning of this program, and a couple of years ago we did an update of that case study. Super interesting. Here, what the government did, it is to put together a fleet modernization program that included it was for which it was mandatory to organize in economic interest group and to operate under service contract, route level service contract, with a very important role of SETUD that supported the organization of an overarching umbrella institution called AFTU. The program had also interesting operational support and maintenance dimensions in the program. Beyond Dakar, the program, as year passed, expanded to secondary cities in Senegal. For me, one of the things that are more interesting about this case, it is that with some, seed support from the government in the initial phase of the program, and with a good monitoring, we're able to get very good repayments from the operators. We were able to actually pass with time to a system that had a lot of interest from local commercial banks to finance, and that had interesting sustainability mechanisms such as a revolving fund. Another case that is quite interesting, it is the program of taxi recapitalization in South Africa. This program was one of the programs in the region that had been able to support the modernization of the higher number of vehicles in the region. I think it was more than 72,000 vehicles we renew along the years. And it has 2 main dimensions on it. It has a regulatory dimensions to create a formal route-specific operating licenses and a mandate actually for the legal registration of vehicles to be able to access to scrapping allowance. The dimension that I think is very interesting about this program, it is actually how this regulatory piece and this scrapping allowance piece made it possible to emerge these specialized paratransit financiers that themselves actually develop very interesting models to mitigate the real unperceived risk to lend to paratransit. For example, using a GPS technology for the tracking. From my point of view, this program, it was, a missed opportunity in the program. It was not supporting some of the other dimensions that we see here, for example, infrastructure, organization on operation and maintenance. In the case of Kenya, here what the government has done years ago, it was to regulate the public transport and to oblige to have formal route-specific operating license, and the organization in associations, on saving associations or cooperatives called SACCOs. An interesting dimension here it is that the government didn't provide any financial support, any subsidy per se to the financing on vehicles for informal transport, but it was through the SACCOs, it was through the saving cooperatives that this financing was actually possible. So this is one solution. What we see that is, in a way, financing comes more from a like bottom-up perspective rather than more like top-down, coming from support from central government. Maputo was also an interesting case, and we will hear later from one of the panelists, where there was a package of reforms that included support to access to financing of vehicles through a transport fund for operating under a leasing basis, an operating leasing basis, and mandated the operators that wanted to participate to organize in cooperatives that needed to operate under service contracts. Together with that, also the government created AMT, which is the transport authority in Maputo. Again, here we see there was no dimensions on supporting infrastructure and operation and maintenance. I didn't go through all the 8 cases, but just in respecting the time that was allowed for my presentation, I will just pass to some of the key lessons learned from these very interesting experiences that our Africa made. They are really interesting experience from the regions. In the paper, we also document some experiences in other parts of the world, but I will just focus on the African experiences. So here, one key dimension, it is that what we saw it is that in some cases have tried to bring change in urban in public transport through requesting to have or mandating to have a fundamental change and a very significant change in the way the sector is organized, in the system, like the level of service expected, the level of contractual arrangement that are requested. That is that approach is not very compatible to integrate informal operators into the solution. For them, it's extremely difficult to be part of the solution. However, incremental approach are much more likely to better integrate informal transport. And what do I mean by these incremental approaches? There are approaches in which you don't aim to have a fundamental change, for example, in the organization or in the contractual arrangement with the informal operators, but actually you do changes that go step by step. The second dimension, it was about the business models and viability and margins of the various stakeholders that need to be adequately considered and integrated into the thinking on the program. And a key dimensions we saw, there were quite a few of the models that have a dimension on vehicle financing. So really the access of affordable vehicle financing and an affordable vehicle itself, we see actually a very important dimensions to allow the programs to get attractive for the sector. We saw that there is a very important role of government here to really give directions and to drive the vision and the implementation of these programmatic programs with informal transport. But we should not underestimate the opportunities for more bottom-up approach, and we have seen the Kigali one through the SACCOs. These are actually some of the initiatives that I think we should explore more and more. There has been also, as you can imagine, the trust and communication are really essential between the government and informal operators, and creating platforms for discussion. I think it has been something that several of the cities have done, and it has been proven to be of significant importance. And then the last point, but not for that less important, it is the need really for capacity building. And this capacity building is not only on the government side, but it's also really supporting the reform to happen through, skills on, business skills or capacity building for drivers, for operators, etc. So I think this really, it has been proven to be one also key dimensions of making these reforms successful. So with all that, the last question that have guided that, it was like, so what are, a practical way forward in this agenda? And for us, reflecting about it, we propose three steps as a way forward. The first one, it is to give a clear purpose and outcomes for the role of informal public transport in urban transport policy and planning. The second one, it is to think about the reform as being something programmatic to support the enhancement, the performance of informal transport. And the third one, it is moving from a strategy to practical measures. And we started developing a toolkit of reform levers that we see really at a living document. I will come back to that in a second. So the first point about defining the role of informal transport, what we see that today, informal transport is invisible in most of the urban transport policy and planning in many, or for instance, like most of the African cities. That really needs to change. We need to change about urban transport policies in the region that follow two tracks. Follow one track on the development of formal modes that we already are seeing in quite few cities. And this is a very important thing to follow. But together with that, there needs to be another track that support the rise of standards, the rise of performance on informal transport. And all this, defining what is the policy, what is the role of informal transport in the urban transport policy and planning will be, defining in more detail what will be the way forward. Then the second dimension, it is to think about the support to the sector in a programmatic manner. And here, earlier on, I talked to you about these three dimensions on informality: the informality on service, informality on authorization, and informality on organization. So what we advocate, it is to have a programmatic view in the way we enhance these three dimensions. So at the end of the day, we were able to advocate for changes in improvement in organizations that come together with improvements in the sector organization, and at the end with the results on improvements of the service delivery. And with all that, on the sector organization, you see here a graph on different steps on this organization. Very important. Key message to keep in. It's really very difficult to pass, for example, for step 2 on operators that form associations. and that operate separately to to a state 5, which is more like BRT type model. Let's try to advocate for models where we really go step by step, rather than trying to make huge jumps in which, as I said before, we will not be able to integrate the existing informal transport in that transition. And the last point in the way forward are, in a practical manner, what can we do? No, so we have developed in this publication, we have started develop this toolkit of reform levers for minibus taxis, and also we have also similar toolbox for motor taxis. And here we have defined these 5 levels of reform level: regulation, organization, vehicle financing, operation, maintenance, and support infrastructure. And what has been some of the practical reforms that we have seen on the ground. As you see here, this table actually is a living document. It's a document that I hope that together with you, we will be able to complete with time based on your experience on things that are working on the ground. So with that, just to conclude, first point, the point that we have been doing from the beginning, we really need a change of paradigm in urban mobility in African cities if we really want the best for African cities and African citizens. And informal public transport need to be at the core of it. There are very interesting experiences in the Africa region on working with informal transport, supporting them, that can be inspirations for many of your cities. And there is this emerging toolbox of reforms that I want to put it there as a joint effort for all of us to build that toolbox over the coming years. You will see here the link of the publication, the Embracing Informal Transport, a New Paradigm for Urban Mobility, and another one of the ones we have published under the DP4, the Senegal Bus Reform Program. There are much more that you can find in the SSATP website. Thank you very much for listening, and over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Fatima. Thanks a lot. And I think now the time has come to hear from the experience of the 4 cities represented by our panelists. I suggest we start with Freetown, Sierra Leone. And Hindolo, could you please give us some background on what's happened and what are your plans in Freetown? You have 5 minutes. I'll turn off my camera. When you see my camera back on, it means you've exceeded your time and it's time to wrap up. Over to you, Hindolo. Hindolo, can you hear us and unmute yourself? All right, it seems Hindolo is having some tech issues. So maybe we'll, oh no, I see you've managed to unmute. Hindolo, can you speak?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. We cannot see you, but if you can turn your camera on, please go ahead and share the experience of Freetown with us.
Sorry about the technicalities that are going on. I guess you can see me now.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. Okay, that's good. Yes.
Yes. Please, Simon, can you just repeat this sentence? I was having glitches. I didn't get you clearly. Sorry. Can you just repeat this? I was
asking if you could give us a brief overview of the situation in Freetown in terms of urban mobility and the role played by paratransit, as well as any reforms that you have undertaken or are planning.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Fatima, for such a brilliant presentation. And also, I want to thank SSATP for this opportunity to have us share from our experience in Freetown. In urban mobility, we are probably at the beginning of big reforms that are happening in Freetown. We are very much moving in 2 dimensions. both what we will define here as formal structured mass transit, but also how, like everybody has mentioned, the demand gap cannot be filled by the reforms in mass transit alone. And like in the presentations we've seen, these are the realities in our cities. Majority of the public transport trips are made by what we have referred to as informal transport. So in Freetown, this is where we are beginning. There is a formal bus service we have known as the work-fine buses, or high-capacity buses that are dedicated to two main corridors in the city. But we also do have podas, which are minibuses, what we call kekes. These are three-wheelers. And then we have commercial two-wheelers that form part of the ecosystem of our public transport in Sierra Leone. In terms of regulatory framework, of course, all of them are fully registered. They are required to have license, and most of them are organized within their industries. They have their unions in terms of national and regional settings, and all of these do engage in some form of formal way. Now, going forward in terms of Sierra Leone, what we are looking at is to organize them to be viable companies to attract bank financing. That is very key, and these discussions are ongoing currently. We are already in preparation to do a second round of our National Transport Strategy and Investment Plan. And as articulated by most of the speakers ahead of me, with the paratransits, the what we call informal transports, into this strategy, for the very same reason that we cannot raise the monies right now to transform everything in terms of mass transit, BRTs, all. The realities are that apart from the fact that the financing challenges are there, the terrain and the geographical makeup of some of our cities require that these two-wheelers and three-wheelers play a very vital role. And finally, the fact that these also provide welfare for majority of our youths, particularly in Freetown, it's something that is worth considering as we mainstream them to structure them to do their services perfectly. I will end my introduction by saying that with all of this, I can understand why the public or some policymakers do turn their faces on them, because the very strength of their easy entrance into the market has also the other side of the sword. It's a double-edged sword that can create serious congestions and to some extent criminality. So these are the spaces we are looking at into Freetown to say, don't throw the baby with the bathwater. Just because there are these challenges of lack of organization or chaos doesn't mean that they are not providing very significant, important services. So how do we create the balance is the question we are trying to answer currently in Freetown. I will want to stop here for now and back to Simon.
Thank you very much, Hindelo. And I hope we can go back to this question of the importance in terms of jobs, but also the question of access to capital during the discussion. Now we're going to turn to Dakar, Senegal, and I'll speak French for that one. Je vais inviter
Amadi Barofaya, can you give us an insight into the Dakar landscape in terms of informal transport? You can tell us how they're organized, structured, the reforms that are now in existence and those to come. Please, can I hand over to you?
Amadi, would you please turn on your microphone? Yes, hello. I've turned on my mic. Hello, everyone. We can hear you. We can't see you. My camera doesn't work, unfortunately. Thank you for giving me this invitation to speak and present transportation in Dakar. The interpreter cannot hear the speaker. Perhaps without sharing your slideshow, you could just give us a brief presentation, introduce the city and the context that you're working in, if you would. All right. The context in Dakar, much like the context of many large African cities in Sub-Saharan Africa, is one where you have both formal and informal modes of transportation. Regarding formal transportation, there's a gap there. And it's informal transportation that fills that gap and is created to do so. In Dakar, this has certainly been the case. In Dakar, in the 90s, informal transportation dominated the market. Roughly 95% of the public transportation sector was dominated by informal forms of transportation, IPTs. And then Senegal implemented reforms, modernization reforms, for these different transportation methods and integrated the IPTs into the transportation offerings of Dakar and made them more formal. We have the Angenga and the shared taxis in Dakar, as well as other modes of transport. And this was required by the context. We've had incredible urbanization take place. And so the demand for transportation has increased exponentially, because people need to get around, of course. And that leads to major mobility challenges when it comes to transportation. The goals, or the goal of this webinar, is to have a conversation about the relations between informal operators and governments. The reforms led to a transportation law, and that led to the regulation of the transportation sector in Dakar. So the law was passed, and a transportation authority was created to bring together the different players in the sector. Modernization and professionalization programs were also created. And currently, over 1,500 transportation operators, both formal and informal, are part of the network, with the 2,500 formal lines with predetermined transportation fees and things like that. But we face certain challenges. Regarding our shared taxis, we've tried to structure them better with a new network in the Dakar region. Regarding these study findings, we've tried to structure our transportation sector better by recognizing what was in place in the informal sector and integrating them and bringing them together in associations in an effort to formalize them from an administrative point of view and another point of view. And we have dispensed trainings to these operators. With these challenges, we have managed to bring about both modernization and professionalization in the sector. Regarding modernization, we divided up the network into different categories. Shared taxis form one group, buses another, and there are other categories as well. With mass transit, we have created one level of transportation categories. And then we also have the other categories, other levels. We also have commuter taxis in the outlying areas. What we've tried to do is to come up with forums for discussion and cooperation. People working in the informal sector needed more structure. They needed their work to be recognized and included in the overall transportation system. So the sector has been formalized, professionalized, and modernized. We've tried to take these themes and integrate the informal public transit operators into the larger system so that their activities can be sustainable for them. We have sought to make this integration process effective, and we all have the bus rapid transit, the local taxis, and others that have seen standards applied and specific rates applied. We've tried to coordinate among multimodal projects to encourage competition among the different actors, both in the public and private sector. So this is a resilient, accessible, and environmentally friendly network now. And this has made the transportation much more resilient. In Dakar, overall, the overarching theme has been formalization. We have tried to professionalize and recognize these informal public transit operators. Now they have an organization of their own. They're much more organized. But they may not seem so from the outside, but they do have internal structures available to them. Thank you so much. That's what I had to share with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amadi. Thank you for stressing the importance of professionalization and structuring, recognition, trust, and cooperation. Let's move on now to Madagascar. We are going to hear about the context of Madagascar. Rojo, would you tell us a bit about urban mobility and the role of transportation there? Hello, everyone. Thank you to SSATP for inviting me to speak about this topic, embracing informal transport, a new paradigm for urban mobility. I'm going to tell you about Antananarivo and the reforms that we have put into place. Just to set the scene, in 2018, we had 3 million residents in the capital. We have taxi Bs, which make up 72% of transportation used. The most frequent vehicles are the 8,000 some minibuses, and they go on 5,000 trips per day, roughly. Under the Antananarivo authorities and the Land Transportation Authority, a regulatory framework has been created to avoid any conflicts. Behind these figures lie certain challenges. Oftentimes, vehicles were owned by just one person. There was a certain precarity or vulnerability in the sector, and other challenges as well. So we have implemented the Urban Transportation Mobility Improvement Program, and we've done this with together with the Île-de-France region in France. We have tried to structure the sector with this PAMU program by creating shelters and creating a business model that allows for the renewal of vehicles. But the PAMU has not had a lasting impact as an institution. The political context has been seen a lot of instability, and in 2013 a Chinese bus line was proposed by the president, and that did not end up being seen all the way through, and so the program ended. The operators who signed up for this went through a difficult period, and if you don't have stable governance, you can't carry out a highly technical project. That was the conclusion. So the professionalization of the sector is not an easy task. We need a long-standing presence of the operators on the ground, a clear framework for the different players, and other components as well. The taxi Bs, as they're called, formed a group in 2003. This project, which was supported by the government and specifically the ministry, with financial from AFD and financing from AFD and other contributors, has managed to remedy these structural deficits of the PAMU. This has dramatically improved the service level and reduced pollution and improved drivers' working conditions. The project, first and foremost, unrolled a line around Antananarivo. This line will test the capabilities of the new system, which will be less polluting and safer when it comes to steady income. And it will also demonstrate strong innovation in order to ensure that the line is fast and reliable. However, more remains to be done. A systemic approach is needed to improve capabilities. We need operational improvements together with the authorities to come up with a reliable shared business model for this sector. We also need a new legal structure, EIGs, for example, in order to take on the risks and financing challenges, especially for the future operators of the lines, capabilities, structure, staffing, and salaries for the operators. The conditions of the context in Antananarivo are unique, but the government has a major role to play and major responsibilities. In a context of deteriorating public transit, the importance of strong governance was clear. especially when it comes to modernization. And in light of all of this, the technical financial partnership that was created provides us with an example of a fruitful, productive partnership.
And we want to anchor this strategically. To round off, we can take up a position across the entire sector for a systematic approach, and our value added involves a local understanding of what's going on, institutional blockage, local protagonists, and this means that we can offer a fabulous partnership to in this complex transport environment.
Go back to English for our fourth city, which is Maputo, Mozambique, and I will ask Afonso Ronda to provide us with a brief presentation of the situation in Maputo in terms of paratransit, past and ongoing reforms. Over to you, Afonso.
The team, and thank you all. Hopefully you are hearing properly. Just a thumbs up, please, if that is the case.
Yes.
I think that Fatima gave a good overview or initial overview. The situation.
Your sound is breaking, Afonso.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay. No, thank you. I was saying that Fatma gave an initial overview of Maputo. Probably that is reflective of a situation that was prevailing a couple of years ago, where AMT was being formed. AMT stands for Agência Metropolitana de Transportes. It is the institution that deals with public transport within the Maputo metropolitan area. In terms of our general environment, there's a number of issues. As a new entity, obviously comes into an environment with existing and multiple stakeholders. So I'll try to touch in all of the aspects in terms of characterization, but obviously focusing more on the informal public transport. Most of the public transport in Maputo is provided by the informal sector, particularly what we call the chapas. The chapas are 15-seater minibuses that constitute the majority of the public transport here. In terms of modal share, they are in excess of 85% of the public transport services that are being provided. So based on that situation, with the new AMT that was formed some years ago in the late 2010s, there was a need to also review additionally the AMT decree in terms of to harmonize in terms of legal framework the operational environment within the metropolitan area, being that metropolitan area is constituted by municipalities and also districts within that boundary, with each of these administrative bodies having certain powers within public transport. So some effort was done in terms of legal framework harmonization that culminated with a revised AMT decree that was concluded this year. This revision in terms of regulatory framework was conducted as part of the urban mobility project. that I'm part of that intends to bring changes, improvement in the regulatory framework, obviously, improve capacity for the public transport industry, professionalization of the informal sector, but also that will bring solutions in terms of an improved public transport system through the introduction of a BRT system. So to allow the BRT system also to improve, some measures are necessary on this on the informal sector. That's why the project has developed something that we can summarize as an industry transition process. Within that industry transition process, obviously, we conducted some studies to understand first in terms of modal share, what was happening in terms of modal share in the public transport system for the Maputo metropolitan area. Also, we have done studies to understand in terms of registry and or number of vehicles available within the public transport system. First, that was aimed mainly to assess also how many of those vehicles were operating on a legal base. So based on that, in terms of types of vehicles that we have, as you said, Shapas, which are 15-seaters, and some minibuses. We have the three-wheelers. We have the My Loves. The My Loves are essentially bus trucks that people take. They are not legal, but they obviously, due to in places to shortages of public transport, they provide services. We have a new phenomenon as well, which is the share rides, which basically are sedan vehicles, which are also illegal, but they operate within certain routes. And we are starting now to see the born of a new type of transport, which are the motor taxis, which are also, in terms of law, they are illegal. Additionally, besides the campaign to understand the number of vehicles that exist, to see also the conditions, we are focusing on the staff. We are providing training to improve capacity building, training that is aimed mostly for the crew, but also for the managers. We have started to implement those trainings some time ago, and we have already finished at least two sessions. Under these training programs, we also have, due to gender issues, we have a particular program which is aimed at women drivers. So those are some of the initiatives that the project is developing within the informal sector, the informal public transport sector. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you so much, Afonso. And so now that we have sort of painted the background picture of paratransit in the four cities, I'll go back to each of you with a specific question. I'll ask you to be brief. We do want to keep some time for questions from the audience. We have a number on the chat. Please keep them coming, and our colleagues will try to respond to some of them while the conversation is going on the screen. But for now, let me go back to you, Hindolo, and ask you, in Freetown, you recently launched formal bus services, as you were mentioning earlier. Can you tell us how and whether that's been a catalyst for paratransit improvement, and also how you integrate the two systems?
Thank you very much, Simon, and to all the presenters. Yes, indeed, we completed the formal transport Waka Fine bus. And the key integration there with the paratransit started first with the fact that the ownership of the very formal transport sector is the unions of these so-called informal transport. So we have the drivers' unions, the union for the two-wheelers, the union for the three-wheelers, all came together to own shares in the formal transport sector, formal transport bus service. That is one. Number two, we established the National Transport Policy Body, the Sierra Leone Public Transport Authority. Now, we are strongly engaging these unions to serve as first and last mile to supply the corridor. That is a second integration that the reform is working with. We are also step up to, as I said earlier in my introduction, to say that because of the vehicle types, because of the chaos, that is why many people tend to want to turn their faces on them, irrespective of the services. So what we have done is to provide under the project that we had, the Integrated and Resilient Urban Mobility Project and the Ministry of Transport, to actually pay for legal services to help them establish companies within these unions that can meet the basic requirement of banks to be able for them to go to get loans to change their fleet. The third aspect is for us to look at how we address the issue of the concerns the public will raise, which is that, well, some, particularly with young ladies taking two-wheelers and three-wheelers late at night, they complain about their bags, their phones, and in few extreme cases, we have had rape issues. So to that extent, we are now developing barcodes for all three and two-wheelers that will be visible on the vests of the drivers so that you can actually just scan their barcodes and you can get all the details of that motorbikes. But also that they are clearly registered within a sub-region. So Freetown is divided into various regions, and we call them what we call counties. And so we can know how many bikes are registered under this county and under which union and which sub-union. That is another reform. Finally, the integration of the reforms for the ministry for the sake of the environment. As we have all alluded to, and I don't want to bore you with statistics, but majority of the trips are done by these two and three-wheelers. Started working on is to get solar panels on top of the three-wheelers. We have done over 150 of those, and we are also transitioning the motorbikes where they can just swap the batteries and do not waste time, because you know one of their strengths is the flexibility of their turnover, and you don't want the reform to impede that flexibility. So we are looking at how they can easily swap their batteries and on the move. So we are also bringing the reform alongside their ICE counterparts to begin to engage the unions as to the benefit of into e-mobility in terms of cost savings, the safety of the public.
Thank you, Hindolo. Your
Yes.
connection is breaking a little, so maybe I'll go to the next panelist. But thank you for this
Okay.
response. Amadi,
Thank you.
une question un peu sur la dimension, le rôle en fait d'une autorité organisatrice.
The role of an organizing transport or urban transport authority, because this study refers to the oldest one on the African continent. Perhaps you could tell us more. Perhaps you can tell us how this institutional environment favors a proper understanding of informal transport in public transport offering and its role. And tell us in 2 minutes.
Merci pour cette question. C'est une question très pertinente.
Thank you for this very interesting question. I think this is one of the oldest, most long-standing authorities. This study emerged from a desire on the government's behalf to better structure the informal public transportation sector. And by bringing in the IPT sector as a complementary part of the transportation sector, well, the study focused on cooperation among the different sector players. The interpreter apologizes, the sound cut out for a moment. This cooperation framework that we studied showed that all of the different players in the transportation sector were brought together, and we tried to see if they were all playing the role they were supposed to play. The informal sector was grouped together by entity, and their part of the market was formalized and regulated. Then we moved on to professionalization. And modernizing their businesses. That made it possible to create trust. The study found that there was trust established between the government representatives and the transportation operators, because they had improved their offerings and improved mobility overall in Dakar. You can't exclude players in the sector that make up a large portion of the sector, over 50% of the sector. You can't ignore them. So we went for the option of integrating them in a clear and definitive way. And that included modernizing and professionalizing their businesses. And we were able to achieve the hoped-for results as far as professionalizing the informal public transportation sector goes. Thank you, Amadi. Now, I'm going to turn to Rojo. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about the details of the initiative in Madagascar that you described. I hear that it's a bottom-up approach, which is different from some of the examples we've heard. And there was an effort to transform the sector. Can you tell us a bit more about the challenges that you encountered with this bottom-up approach? Thank you, Simon. Yes. In Antananarivo, it was a bottom-up approach that was employed that brought together users, operators, and other sector players to build something together with the people who live on the ground and the different operators. And there was a forum in 2024 that brought together all of the different stakeholders in mobility in Antananarivo, including government representatives. The advantages to the approach that we adopted were that it was more realistic and better adapted to needs on the ground. Different operators were able to take part and shape the outcome. It also created a strong set of results because the change came from those who were concerned, those who were impacted. But we also encountered some challenges. It was a long process because when you build something together, it takes a long time, and there's also the political dimension that was complex. You have the interests of small-scale operators, project stakeholders. It's this fragile process. Many things were questioned, and we saw this with the PAMU program I mentioned. Thank you. And I'll just add one last thing. Regarding the role of Kodatu, we played a key role of mediator And also, we documented this project, which, despite the obstacles, was worthwhile.
The question is for Afonso. So in Mozambique, paratransit improvement started with the creation of cooperatives in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, and now forms part of the strategy to develop a high-capacity bus system. Can you explain how strengthening the organization of the industry has laid the foundation for future reforms?
Okay, thank you, Simon, for that question. Indeed, with the formation of cooperatives, that was also to start to answer to a problem or to indicate a way in which the operators, which were in associations and or in individual operators, to improve their form of operation. Also, based on that, of formation of these cooperatives and the creation of AMT, there has been an integrated approach in between AMT and those cooperatives in the industry in terms of management of the industry. With that, also, it was clearly identified that challenges within the public transport sector required additional efforts, and that was also the basis for the creation of this project, of the urban mobility project, whereby let's say the operators are represented within the structures of the project, and as I mentioned before, several actions are being designed, not only within the project, but also within the Ministry of Transport and Logistics. With the formation of the cooperatives and also moving forward and into the future, obviously it will be important for in terms of commercial viability to go into the next step, which will be the formation of vehicle operating companies. And that we are doing also in conjunction with the operator or continuously assessing the operations of which these cooperatives still form part, but also we still have a large portion of routes being served by associations that we need to change the paradigm of provision of public transport. So within that, obviously aspects of regulations, concessions, fare systems, the whole license process. Those are questions that are being raised to create opportunities for further reforms, so that we can have an industry that is profitable in a way, and that people can still want to operate and provide better services to the population. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Afonso. So now we have a few minutes left to take questions from the audience. If you want to add questions to the chat, you're welcome to do so. I'll share them with our presenter and panelists, and we'll see how many we can take. We started a few minutes late, so we might run a few minutes over to make up for it. And so in terms of the questions, some of the questions we've received, there's a question on whether there are examples of restructuring incentives to improve level of service, safety, cleanliness, following assigned zones, so zoning of operations. So if one of our panelists wants to take that one, I'll give you several at a time. So this question about restructuring incentive. Then there's a question about the place of capacity and capacity building. Are there any plans to integrate training in the toolkit for changing the paradigm with paratransit improvement? And then there's a question, I guess, that all of you can answer in the chat, but about the kinds of monetary relationships that exist between the vehicle owner and the operator. And I think this business model is quite central. Understanding it is quite central to trying to change it and to change the way the industry operates. So if anyone has a comment on that, maybe we can start with these three questions. Any of you would like to react? Maybe starting with you, Fatima, but if some of the panelists also want to react, please raise your hand.
Yeah, so maybe just to mention that indeed on the question on the incentives to so what we have seen in general, these programs on transition on enhancement often include some dimension on incentives. Fleet modernization, for example, is one incentive, and include at the same time some level of supporting the organization of the sector and a certain level of regulation to operate under certain rules, no? And that regulation usually have a focus, and there is a question about that, and I link the answer to that question also, about the dimension on the regulation should focus in two main dimensions, on safety and on how to better match supply and demand in the corridors. So indeed, I think what we see it is what works well is really to work this in a way like a package, no, where we have identified these 5 different reform levers that can be, work together, and there are some dimensions that are incentives and some dimensions that are more to set certain rules of operations. Thanks.
Thank you, Fatima. I think Hindolo also wants to come in on one of the 3 questions. Over to you.
Yes, Simon. Quickly for me on the area of capacity building, I think what we have done is to ensure that we bring to speed the structure of these unions so that they can engage with the banks. That is in terms of getting access to financing and restructure their fleet, but also the training of their drivers. Also, we've built capacity around how they keep their books and become accountable to their members, how they are able to collect data as well that the regulatory authority can use in terms of how we go into zoning. So capacity building is extremely important if we are going to ensure that we work alongside the paratransit and not try to replace them, because that is when they are able to engage the public and provide a very valuable service in a structured way. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hindolo. And we have a question in French. Maybe we'll take 2 last questions. So la question en français concerne
the question in French has to do with whether the formalization of informal public transit in Africa can increase inclusivity and integration among the urban and outlying areas. First, regarding the first part of the question, integration between urban and outlying areas and social and spatial dimensions, and then the role of data and mobility observatories and organizations can play in terms of collecting information and documenting the sector. So the person who asked this question would like to know whether this is something that's going to be expanded by policy makers and others. Would someone like to answer these 2 different questions? First of all, the organizations responsible for oversight, and second of all, the more geographic dimensions.
Amadi, allez-y.
Go ahead.
Je vais démarrer par la question de l'observatoire.
So let me look at
Je pense que c'est nécessaire d'avoir
this.
de la donnée.
It's important to have data
Au moins améliorer l'activité de ces transporteurs.
to improve the transporters' activities. Without data, things can't be done properly, and you can't make what they do lawful. Now, the Institute initially does a mapping exercise of the protagonists in order to see how many players there are. And then you can act properly. So we see who they are, to build them in, to bring more modernization. Data is the name of the game, and also for feedback to modernize and to harmonize. At the Institute, we have digitalized all the network. The formal as well as the informal transport network has been digitalized, and we've identified these players. We've geolocalized where they operate. On the basis of that exploratory work, we try to see what levers can be pulled to improve mobility and the livelihood of these players. Now, what about decentralization of this business and democratization? So, on the major arteries, there's a demand that's very much up. And on some arteries, we want to restructure to use also the BRPs. And we reorganized and restructured the main network, the existing network. But there's also another way forward. The collective taxis, they were informal. We're trying to professionalize them. And encouraging them to better organize themselves, to operate on another basis. So we've worked on scope, geography, on these various activities, and we've associated that with a digitalization approach. And without that digitalization, it'd be very difficult to move forward. Thanks very much, Amady. We'll take two final questions before we round off.
I'll switch back to English. So we have a question in the chat about the process to usher reforms and how do you achieve a smooth transformation? So we know the paratransit industry can be quite volatile, that if reforms are not carefully considered, they can trigger a lot of backlash and be abandoned because of the sheer sort of weight of the paratransit industry. So how do you introduce reforms smoothly? How do you make sure that the process unfolds in a non-confrontational way? So that's a first question. And then maybe the last one was on the chat by Cecilia. There's a question about the place and role of payment systems. I think maybe I'll reformulate a little bit, but a question could be, you know, what's the importance of automated fare collection or cashless or ticketing systems in the process of professionalizing paratransit? You know, is it a precondition? Can it be done without? And do some of you have experience in this field? So two last questions, one about the process and, you know, avoiding conflict with the industry, and the second one about fare collection and ticketing. Who would like to come in?
I think that, well, I will contribute to the first one because we are in the middle of the process. And I think that it's fair to say that there is experience worldwide, and particularly here in Africa, where different levels of success have been achieved. So at this stage of our process, and because we're starting to build on that, we try as much as possible to try to understand in between the process that were a success and the process that had challenges, to try to get feedback. We do expect that the approach where involvement of the industry, of the operators that are providing the services, can mitigate, let's say, confrontation or what do you call it, challenges to the implementation of an efficient public transport system. So we don't have the experience. We're trying to build on that. As I said, there was a start of a process in 2017, and we're still building, looking at what other examples do we find, particularly on an African context, but also primarily bringing on board the operators. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso. Does anyone want to share their experience on fare collection?
I can come on quickly on that one, Simon, if no one is coming. So I think on this one, it's something when we were talking about the organization of the sector, no, and how we see this more as a step-by-step process. What we have seen, it is a quite significant step in the process and relatively complex to achieve. It is the collective management of fleet and the collective management also of the revenues of the system. Even in programs that had certain level of request for organization, regulation, and all of that. In many of the cases, what we have seen, it is that within the specific corridors they need to operate under the certain level of services, the operations continue to be in a way individualized, individual. So and there is not this share, revenue operation. So this is just to mention that this is a part that is relatively complex. The use of fare collection system, it is something that sometimes is seen, okay, this is really the solution, but it has proven to be difficult to implement because of what I just mentioned. This is, from an organization point of view, this is a very big, it's very significant structural change. However, for me, a key dimension to think of and discuss about the benefits of integrating in the fare collection, and I think this is linked to the second part of the question of Cecilia. It is about the benefits it can have to track, to bring transparency and accountability of revenues, and that actually it is key at the end of the day to be able to get access to commercial finance. So I think actually one of the key dimensions on why to use fare collection when discussing with informal operators, for me, is not as much about, these are the efficiency gains you will get, which might be the case and is good to mention. But for me, a key dimension is actually the important also as a facilitator to then get access to commercial finance, which we know that it is a very important barrier in the industry. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Fatima. And I see that we are already over our time. So I will now thank all the panelists. Can I invite all panelists to turn on their camera briefly so that we see their face and we can take a group photo? Mustafa, you too, like all the speakers, let's say. So we can take a sort of a virtual group photo. Est-ce que vous pouvez tous allumer votre caméra pour qu'on fasse une
Can you
photo
turn on
de
your
groupe
cameras? Then we
virtuelle?
can have a group photo, a virtual group photo.
All right, merci. And then I would like to invite Mustafa as a program manager for SSATP to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Simon, for an excellent webinar. I was even tempted to step in and maybe provide some answers to the questions. But anyway, as we wrap up this webinar, I would like to share with you a few takeaways and maybe some recommendation going forward, because this is, as I said in the opening, it's a central piece of work and SSATP development plan. I think if I have to take some points from the discussion, I think there is clearly a need to do more advocacy work to demystify this paratransit. And I think this webinar is providing one step towards making integration of a paratransit more visible. I heard this word moving from invisible to visible. And I think we need to carry out this advocacy work with our city governments and development partners. We shouldn't underestimate this. I don't think it's sinking within the mindset, the minds of our decision makers, policy makers. The second takeaway, I like some of the recommendations, is really to go with a programmatic approach to enhancing the integration of the informal public transport and demonstrates its efficiency as well. I think SSATP is working on a paper straight on as we speak on the economics of paratransit. I think we need to do this, which will also help do the advocacy work that I mentioned earlier. It will be most useful when we talk about because I heard about how to go and implementing these reforms. And here, Fatima mentioned this preparation of the toolkit. And I hope in this toolkit, we will include the how or give some guidance on the implementation strategy. You know, it will differ from the country to the city to the context, but I think a pragmatic approach how to get these implementation step by steps, the things that you need to look at and so forth. The other takeaway as well is really a communication strategy. We shouldn't underestimate. I think that came as part of some of the questions. I think we have a good example so far from Uganda in Kampala, going back to demystifying this paratransit and build bridges of communication. I think the stakeholders, paratransit stakeholders forum that was established in Kampala, Amanda, who was leading it, was here last week. And I heard that they are really making progress. So they provide a platform for exchange between the paratransit sector and the administration. It doesn't exist in many countries, in many cities. I think it's really important to have this platform. I think that's the case of Dakar when he was asked and he was talking about cadre de concertation. I think we need to have more and more of these forums so we can engage in dialogue because it's a complex activity. But overall, in terms of recommendations, I think in addition to formal public transport, another moment in Africa when we talk about formal public transport, it's mainly BRTs. I think we can pursue these. They can be a good catalyst, but as the studies demonstrate, BRT by itself cannot be the answer. And I think we would like going forward to make sure informal public transport is part of the policy dialogue that we're having with our countries, and be part also of the transport policy documents we produce and strategies. I think we need to bring this at the forefront in Africa, the paratransit reform agenda. The third And then if we can translate this and make informal public transport part of the investment project, urban transport project financed by the development partners, I think we got this, but I don't think we are there yet. We started with fleet renewals as some of the project component. I think we need to pursue this and maybe identify other project component. I'm thinking maybe why not to build dedicated lanes for informal transit. Maybe re-enter through the bus terminals. We are doing this study with the bus terminals. I think the recommendations are very clear. And then include in our investment projects a component on capacity building. I think that's really important. Third recommendation is to make the integration of the informal public transport part and parcel of the mandate of the urban mobility authorities. I think the paper Fatima did a couple of years ago on the governance of the sector, if I remember well, out of 12 urban mobility authorities, only 2 have enhancing informal public transport or activities to integrate the informal public transport in the whole city transport as part of their activities. I'm thinking about Situd. I think Amadi talked a little bit here on Dakar. And if you remember well, Lamata in Lagos, and they are starting this. But it's not common. It's not embedded in the business plan of these authorities. And I think we would like to see more and more of this because it's a long-term endeavor. So those are maybe the takeaways and recommendations that I would like to make. But I really want to extend my thanks to you, Simon, Fatima, Kauri, for putting together this webinar. I would like to thank our panelists, Andalou from Freetown, Amadi from Dakar, Rojo from Antananarivo, and Alfonso from Maputo. Thanks to the 178 participants who have joined us today. A special note of appreciation also goes to the SSATP donors, the European Commission, the Swiss and the African Development for their continued support. Thank you all for your participation and engagement. We look forward to continuing this dialogue and working together to make integrated, inclusive urban transport really a reality across Africa. So thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. And with that, we close our webinar. Stay tuned for future webinars on our website. Please register for our newsletter if you haven't done so yet. And you can follow us on social media for future announcements. Enjoy the rest of your day and goodbye.